Okay, thank you everyone for coming to the June meeting of the New Jersey Butterfly Club. Our presenter today is Wade Wander, who's going to be presenting on a very interesting topic of moths and their host plants. So I'm going to welcome Wade to the podium.
Thanks, Evan. Right. So Sharon and I intended to give a very different program today, a program way different than any program ever given before to NAVA, but we ran out of time. So I created a substitute program, and this ties in rather nicely with the April program, which some of you may recall was the Extraordinary Caterpillar. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I thought that was a top-notch program. Very well done. It checked all the boxes for me. It was no longer than an hour. I hope I can say the same about this when I'm done. It had wonderful photography and engaging commentary. So once you've got those, you pretty much got it all. So today's program is going to be basically on moths and host plants. We've had previous programs where Sharon primarily has talked about butterflies and host plants. So what native plants can you plant to attract butterflies? Well, so today we're going to discuss moths, and there's a lot more moths than butterflies. So this program is going to be a little on the long side. I'm going to try and go through it pretty fast. So up on the screen right now, we have on the upper left a Parthenice tiger moth. The upper right is this is why I put names on slides, because it's a common lytrosis. And the one on the bottom, of course, is the Io moth. If there was one problem I had with the extraordinary caterpillar, it was a failure like all nature programs have, and that is when they show something and they talk about something, they don't always identify what it is. No excuse for that. What does it take? 2 seconds to tell you what the name is? I like to know what it is so I can look it up. I like looking things up. So we're going to avoid that problem today. Everything is going to be identified. There's probably there's like 70 slides. Most of them have multiple images. So, oh, you know what, Edmund? You didn't tell me how to
The arrows, yeah.
Okay, but before we get started, I'm going to go really off topic and talk about our pond in the front yard. At some point, it developed a lot of green algae. You probably know where I'm going with this, but once we identified what the problem was, we consulted an expert, and it was not green water. We consulted someone up in Hamburg, and we made the suitable adjustments, and this is what it looks like now. Pretty good, huh? Not too bad. I should hire myself out to the government. But the joke's on me, because today our power went out in the morning, and when it came back on, the pump didn't come back on. And the pump has got the UV filter that controls the green algae. So it's going to be green again before I know it. In any event, there's a couple of wood frogs there hanging out. Okay, early March 2026, just a few months ago. This is an image of about 150 moths, primarily of three species, only three species. This was part of a group of about 400, believe it or not, moths of the same three species. And that sounds like a lot, except when you realize that in 2015, at the same time of year, with the same species, I had over 900. And 400 that we had this year was the best we've had in a little while. So what are these? And why are these important? Well, most of the ones in that image were toothed phagalias, and a few small phagalias. That's on the upper right. And this is a caterpillar I found of the small phagalia on hackberry, one of the hackberries in our yard. And another species is the half-wing. The males on the left, the females are flightless. And that's true of the phagalias as well, and some other early emerging species. And on the bottom is a half-wing caterpillar. And another species that shows up a little bit later, but in big numbers, is the one-spotted variant. Now, why are these important? They're important because they are abundant, and they overwinter as pupae. And so with the first warm days of late winter, early spring, they emerge and they start flying around. And they're incredibly common compared to most other species. So what we have then is a lot of caterpillars. And they go through the process when they come out of mating, egg laying, hatching, and then they go through the 5 or 6 instars. And by that time, the resident birds like chickadees and titmice and the like, they're already feeding young. And the first migrants are coming through. So this is a ready-made bounty for them. And it's very important for young birds in particular, the nestlings, because they need protein. And one thing that's really overlooked too is moisture. They principally get moisture from caterpillars, those nice squishy green caterpillars. So where do they find them? Well, they find them on pavement crawling around, or they find them on leaves, usually on the underside of leaves. And the birds are really, really good at finding stuff, so they can find stuff in the caterpillars' leaf shelters that they construct. They're very good. I mean, if a chickadee's got to find 900 caterpillars, they got to raise a brood, as Doug Tallamy pointed out, they've got to know what they're doing. 9,000, what did I say? 900. Ooh. Where else can you find them? Twigs, on clothing or on skin, and also hanging on silken threads, particularly on windy days. When I was a kid, we called them inchworms, and they were all over the place. When you went out birding in the morning, looking into the light, you'd see scads and scads of these little silken threads with all of these inchworms hanging down, and that was the primary food source. These days, it's rare that I come across an inchworm hanging down in the canopy. And you also find them on oaks. So this is a nice segue into my discussion of various plant families and the specific moths that they attract, because I just like to associate a face with a name. So it's not enough for me to know that if you plant this, they will come. I need to know what they is, so I can develop a better appreciation and learn something in the process. So Doug Tallamy's pointed out, he and his students have pointed out that oaks are the most important family. That's the family Fagaceae, that's chestnut, oaks, And what am I leaving out? Chestnut oak, chestnut oaks, and what, Sharon? Beech. Thank you. Basically, the genus Quercus. And I'm not going to be discussing beech for obvious reasons. They're all dying. And chestnut, well, you all know about American chestnut. So it's going to be primarily oak. So the oaks are divided into two groups, the red or the black oak group, easily told by the pointy lobes on the leaves, and most of the lobes end in a bristle, which we call the bristle tip. And then the members of the white oak group have rounded lobes without any bristles. Now, those holes there are not moth related. That's a fly, the shot hole leaf miner. But it's the best picture I had of a white oak leaf. And we, as being in a butterfly club and people are knowledgeable about butterflies, we have several species that host on oaks. These two are um, obligate feeders, the white M hair streak and oak hair streak. And whenever I see either one, I'm very happy because they're quite rare. That's the fastest people I had leave a talk in a long time. So, but, you know, for every species of butterfly in New Jersey, there's at least 16 species of moths. And moths, as a rule, lay a lot more eggs than butterflies do. So there's going to be a whole lot of caterpillars out there, and almost all of them are going to be moth caterpillars. So what are we talking about for oaks? Now, obviously, I'm not going to show you every moth that hosts on oaks. Would be here all night. But these are all of these photos you're about to see are my own photos, and they're all taken at my moth station where we live in Sussex County. And I started this in 2001, so 25 years of data. And during that time, over 1,200 species I've recorded, just in a, you know, a regular sort of, not exactly suburban, it's kind of rural, kind of a mix, I call it ruburbia. But we're surrounded by woods and we have lots of different kinds of habitats, so we attract a fair number of moths. So the scarlet underwing is one of many species of underwings. They're called underwings because you really need the hind wing or the underwing to identify them, and they can be red and black, orange and black, yellow and black, pink and black, white and black, or just plain old black with a white fringe. This one happens to be one of the red ones, the scarlet underwing. And I may as well just get this out of the way right now. A lot of these photos were taken some years ago when moths were more common. Nowadays, I have seen some great oak daggers this year already, but I have not seen a scarlet underwing, but the underwings are ready to come out now pretty soon. Here are three more. I'm just trying to remember now whether these are obligate oak feeders. A lot of moths are polyphagous, so they'll feed on lots of different plants. Now, usually it's grouped, so something that feeds on a woody species will feed on other woody species. Or if it's herbaceous, they'll feed on other herbaceous species. And in the field guides, it's often referred to as low plants. That's code for non-woody, just herbaceous species. The pink-striped oakworm moth is interesting because I saw my first one at the house in either 2022 or 2023, and I've had them every year since. Why they didn't show up before that, I don't know. They're sexually dimorphic. This is a female. The males have translucent spots in the wings. And I can remember many years ago, one of the first trips to Sawmill Road up in High Point State Park, we saw a female pink-striped oakworm moth on the pavement being assaulted by about 15 males. And that's the first and only time I've seen big numbers of pink-striped oakworm moth. Prominents are very common, lots of different species. I think I've had 40 different species at my moth station. And then there's the red-lined Panapoda. A word about pronunciations. I don't know that I'm pronouncing these things correctly, but the only way to really do it is to do it with conviction. Just some more that are oak feeders. Red-humped oakworm moth. Now I think that these are the caterpillars for the red-humped oakworm moth. I'm not positive because this genus, the genus Cimarista, consists of 4 different species. 3 of them look almost identical as adults. This is the one that's different, but all 4 have larvae, which are very, very similar, almost identical. So this, I really have my doubts that this is red-humped oakworm moth caterpillars because this was on the underside of a leaf on our sourwood tree. Obviously not an oak. But on the other hand, what we know about host plants is really limited. I mean, it's not like butterflies. Moths are not nearly as well studied as butterflies. So you'll see in a moth identification guide, you'll frequently see host unknown, host unknown. And that is particularly true of the micro moths, and we're not going to be showing any micro moths today. But the micro moths, very little is known about host plants, but a surprising number of the larger moths, we do not know what the host plant is. And even if it is listed, was it something that was fed to them and they ate it, but they wouldn't eat it in the wild? Who knows? Another big group are the cherries. Lots of different things in the rose family. There it is in the upper part there, Rosaceae. This is black cherry, a very common tree here in our woodlands. It doesn't make particularly good growth in New Jersey, but it doesn't really matter. The moths don't care. And you'll know this as a host plant for things like striped hairstreak and tiger swallowtail. But there's a whole bunch of moths that use the rose family. Here's some more examples of plants in the rose family: chokeberry, the genus Aronia, choke cherry, Prunus virginiana. Shadbush is in the rose family, and various hawthorns are also in the rose family. I say Crataegus species because who knows? Very hard to identify. All it takes for a fist fight is 1 hawthorn and 2 botanists. So what feeds? Whoop. Okay. So these are all things that have shown up at the house frequently. Turn on a light and you'll get some of these. The tufted bird dropping moth. You can tell that this is a very, very fresh specimen. You got those iridescent azure shoulder patches, and then you got all those other colors. Just like butterflies, when moths are out for a few days, a lot of those nice extravagant colors sort of fade away. So it's always nice getting fresh specimens. Cherry scallop shell. Several different species of furcula. I think I've got most of them. And then another underwing. You remember the scarlet underwing that was an oak feeder? Well, the Altronia underwing, which is more common, is strictly a rose family feeder. I love the pattern of the forewings. It looks like wood grain. Very, very attractive moth, the Altronia underwing. Underwings come out late for the most part. So we're just getting into underwing season now. They're just emerging. And last year was a terrible year for underwings. I hope this year is better. And also you find other interesting things on cherries. Now here's just some young cherry saplings. This is at Kittatinny Valley State Park, which I think we saw on one of our walks. And you can see here all these cocoons. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I counted 9. Another one up there. I counted 9 total in the field. And these are the cocoons of one of the giant silk moths, probably Promethea moth, possibly Polyphemus. But what was interesting was right next to this, same age, was an Elaeagnus, a olive, autumn olive. And that had nothing on it, absolutely nothing. Drove the lesson home for folks. Hickories, very, very popular. Several species of hickories in New Jersey. They're all reasonably common, particularly like shagbark hickory, which most of you are probably familiar with, family Juglandaceae, which also includes the walnuts. I'm not going to talk about walnuts because, I mean, it's a nice native tree, but it's allelopathic and not too many people are going to want to plant walnuts. But I recommend planting hickories. And here are some, just a small sample of some of the species that are not always obligate hickory feeders, but hickory features prominently in the diet of the caterpillars. Clouded underwing is one of my favorites. A peony underwing. A peony is interesting. A peony was a rather, I guess you'd say, a minor Greek mythology figure. She was had a goddess of medicine, of soothing, and her husband was the god Asclepius, which you know as the genus of milkweeds, and he was also a god of health, and yeah, so. That's very interesting. It's a beautiful moth. It's one of the what we call the black underwing moths, and most of those have these very interesting names of basically a theme of sadness or bereavement. Hence the black color. So you've got the mourning underwing. Mourning, I mean bereavement, not time of day, and the sad underwing and the inconsolable underwing and the forsaken underwing, and the well, the listed dejected underwing, and then we have things like hickory tussock moth. Sometimes the name gives it away. It's named after the prominent host plant. There's several different species of tussock moth, and you frequently see the caterpillars crawling around during the day. So like all caterpillars, if it's hairy and fuzzy, best not to pick it up. Maples. A very odd fact is that no butterfly species hosts on maple. Lots of maples, they're very widespread and common, but there's no species of butterfly that we know that hosts on it. But the moths more than make up for it. So here's a sample of some of the moths. Some of these are obligates, obligate feeders. The rosy maple moth, which many of you have probably seen, they're out now. They're in the silk moth family, but they're one of the small ones. And they got that garish coloration. And they feed principally on maples, but also on a few other things like oak. The maple looper moth, for some reason, it's not coming to me whether that's an obligate maple feeder or not. Lesser maple spanworm moth is at times incredibly common. So this would be very important for birds, and also spiders and other insects that eat caterpillars. And then the oddball in the group is the maple callus borer, which doesn't really look like a moth at all. But it's a dead giveaway with that antennae. A lot of moths have what we call thread-like antennae. And there's many species of these borer moths. And they're usually not attracted to light. They're usually not attracted to bait, but they are attracted to pheromones. And believe it or not, you can go online and buy pheromones for every one of these borer moths. I have not sunk that low yet. Although I am running out of new moths. Birches, Betulaceae. This is a gray birch in our yard with the catkins. Another popular group, a widespread group of plants, several different species. And then we get these, the arched hook tip, which is one of my Star Trek series of moths. The very yummy chocolate prominent, another one of those prominents. They're very, very common as a group. The birch dagger. Now, most of these dagger moths have black streaks through the wings, hence the name dagger. This is one of the ones that doesn't. It's a very pale one, and it's also quite uncommon. And then another one of our wood grain specialists, the bicolored wood grain. All of these are birch feeders primarily. So when people say, just plant oaks, maybe a few hickories you can throw in, really, that's not the best thing to do, in my opinion, even though oaks by themselves attract more lepidoptera than any other group. But variety is what is very important, species diversity. So it's nice to have a forest of all of these different species, or at least many of them. Now, the foresters hate that because these other species aren't valuable commercially, these other species of trees, and they compete theoretically with oaks and hickories. But it's nice, and it's also, to me, more resilient because although there aren't many oak diseases running around, sure as shooting there will be. There's either going to be an insect or something else, a mold or something that's going to attack oaks. And if you got a forest full of oaks, then you're up the creek. So it's nice to have a lot of different species. Everything we're showing you here today should be part of a forest if you've got the room to do it. The Salicaceae are the willows and the poplars and the aspens. And I don't mean tulip poplar when I say poplar, I mean poplars, tulip. Tulip poplar should always be referred to as tulip tree. So big-tooth aspen, there's a lot of moths that love aspens, and same thing with willows. I think of all the shrubs, willow is probably the most important to, there are more species of moths that host on willows and perhaps other members of the Salicaceae than any other family of shrubs. And we know a few things that go to willows. Dreamy dusky wing, which has become quite uncommon. Viceroy, of course, and there's a viceroy caterpillar. But the moths, cool moths, man. Another prominent. I'm showing you a lot of prominence because they're very common as a group, although the individuals are declining. So here's a black-rimmed prominent. I always like to take photos, if I can, of the wings spread, because oftentimes that's key to identification. Now, when I first started off mothing, the only field guide back in 2001 was the Cavell guide. It was one of the Peterson field guide series. And it was all, aside from one or two plates, it was all black and white plates and of pinned specimens. So as you can imagine, that was very frustrating. It forced me to look at patterns nowadays, things are a lot easier. Of course, you have field guides, you got online sources, you got damn iNaturalist, which is forcing me out of work. Who needs me? You're just iNaturalist. But the black-edged prominent, another interesting prominent. I love the little sage band here across the wings. Beautiful, beautiful moth. Unfortunately, it's not very common. The herald is interesting. It's one of the few moths that overwinters as an adult. So you find it in nooks and crannies here and there, under bridges, overpasses, that sort of thing. And another one of my favorites is the big poplar sphinx, otherwise known as the modest sphinx because of its somber colors. But if you spread the wings out, you'll see it's got kind of a violet, almost like a duck speculum kind of deal there going on. These sphinx moths are very big and very fast flying, very big bodied, very powerful moths. The first one that showed up at our house was plastered up against this sliding glass door that goes from our kitchen to our deck. And it looked like a tough customer, so I sent Sharon out to investigate it. And then when it just turned out to be a sphinx moth and not a bat, then I came out. Oh, that's right. Oh, you put it under a basket. I felt safe then. It's under a basket. Hackberry. Now, here's an example of with trees and shrubs, you don't need a lot to attract certain species of moths. One will do. We planted a wild hydrangea some years ago, which is incidentally a terrific shrub, a native shrub to plant. If you can find it, grab a wild hydrangea and plant it. They're also fairly shade tolerant, although not deer resistant. And so we have 3 hackberries on our property, and we get all of the hackberry butterflies and many of the hackberry moths. Regarding that wild hydrangea, a few years after I planted it, what shows up but a hydrangea leaf tire moth? I never had one before. Planted a hydrangea, I got the hydrangea leaf tire moth. Hackberries are really interesting plants. I like them. They also they volunteer in our yard and our garden quite a bit. So anybody who wants a hackberry, let me know. I got them all over the place. So what goes to hackberry? Well, of course, we know the butterflies that lay eggs on hackberry, like question mark, and American snouts, by the way, which are just showing up in North Jersey within the past few days. And tawny emperor, and which just showed up for the first time yesterday this year. And then that's a tawny emperor caterpillar that I found on the underside of one of our hackberry trees. But as far as the moths are concerned, small heterocampa, these aren't, as showy as some of the other ones. But a few show up every year because of the hackberries, the thin-lined owlet. And here's a caterpillar when I found it on the underside of a hackberry leaf the other few years ago. I had no idea what it was. I had to look it up, and it turned out to be the ruddy dagger moth, of which I've only had a few adults show up at the lights over 25 years. Sassafras. Sassafras has a lot going for it. It's a native tree. It's got terrific color in the fall. It's got green twigs, so it's got winter interest. It's got 3 different shaped leaves. It's got a nice smell to it. A lot of good things about sassafras. Spicebush swallowtail is a big sassafras feeder. Sometimes I think more important than the spicebush shrub. And then one day I was walking, I don't know what I was doing. I was over at the patio doing something, and I looked up into the sassafras, and I saw these guys hanging. Now, my first thought was that this was a primitive wasp called what is it, Sharon? The group of sawflies. I thought it was one of the sawflies. They adopt that position, frequently, but I couldn't figure out what sawfly it was. And then I said, well, maybe it is a moth. And then somehow I came across scallop moths. Scallop moths lay eggs on sassafras. And here is a scallop moth on one of our chairs on the deck at night. There's another species which is a beautiful dark color called a dark scallop moth. That was very exciting. Dogwoods, of course, are common as well. You've all seen silky dogwood and gray dogwood and red osier dogwood. We're talking about the shrub dogwoods now, not the tree dogwood, Cornus Florida. So summer azure, or whatever you want to call the azure that flies in summer here. That is very frequently seen around dogwoods, the shrub dogwoods. And for flowering dogwood, which is not as common a tree as it used to be, but there's a specialist there in the moth department as well called the dogwood thyatorid. And I get a few of these that show up every year. Moving right along, there are the viburnums. Now, I have to thank Sharon for improving this program quite a bit by correcting all of my misspellings. I am the world's worst speller. And updating the taxonomy. Taxonomists, I still say, are vicious people. They keep changing the names on stuff, and I cannot keep up. So a lot of the names I was using were old names that I grew up with. So that's Caprifoliaceae, arrowwood viburnum, or simply southern arrowwood. That's that one over there, and maple leaf viburnum. We've seen these on field trips. So we've seen a lot of maple leaf viburnum, for example, at Jenny Jump State Forest. It's shade tolerant, wonderful thing to plant. Arrowwood viburnum is kind of requires more sun and a little bit of moisture, although it will grow in regular soil. And this attracts, I mean, how about this grouping? This, I'm not making this stuff up. All of these show up. They all show up in the yard, just that they're out at night, so we don't know it. But they're there. So the horrid Zowie is just it's pronounced Zowie, by the way. For years I was saying Zale until somebody corrected me. What the hell are you talking about? It's got this like rough around here, you know, and it's got this inky color with the brown coming in and all this vermiculation here. Terrific, terrific moth, and it's fairly common. The green marvel is one of my superhero moth collection, of which there are a few. And the yellow vein geometer, I mean, look at that. That is just one fantastic moth. Interesting story about that. Sunday morning, I woke up at around 6 o'clock, and I woke up with a start. I jackknifed out of bed, and I said, what the hell was I thinking? Yellow vein geometer is not a viburnum feeder, it's a blueberry feeder. What's the matter with me? So before I forgot, I walked into the office, called up the program, and I made the necessary change. And just as I was congratulating myself on avoiding a stupid error that I'm sure everyone here would have noticed, I said, wait a minute. No, yellow vein geometer is a viburnum feeder. I was right the first time. Then I had to switch it back again. So what's interesting, though, if I can just digress here for a minute, is that I wasn't thinking about this when I went to bed. I wasn't thinking about the program at all. So how did this just pop into my head about yellow vein geometry? Just goes to show you, there's things going on up there rather than simply, running bodily functions like pulmonary and digestive and that sort of stuff. It's like HAL the computer in 2001. It's doing things. So that was weird. And then there's the chestnut schizura, which is another one of the prominents. Cool grouping there. Speaking of blueberries, you're familiar with high bush blueberry and low bush blueberry. Those are the common ones that we see. And striped hair streak is a well-known blueberry feeder, among other things. But so are these other dudes, which I really enjoy. The Harris's 3-spot terrific looking moth, very unlike anything else in the moth department. That, believe it or not, is a dagger moth. I don't know how it got into the daggers, but the taxonomists put it in with the daggers. Formosa looper moth, intricately patterned. When it's very fresh, it's got some nice pink overtones. And then there's the decorated owlet. This is like a huckleberry and a low bush blueberry feeder. And if you're up on one of the ridges, like if you're hiking up to the Sunrise Mountain Shelter, for example, or some other places that's high and dry, where there's a lot of low bush blueberry and huckleberry, that is the dominant moth that you'll see in May and June. You won't know it. They're smallish and they're flying around and you can't get good looks at them, but they're almost all decorated owlets. Cool name too. Okay, the grapes. Now, when you read the moth field guide, you're going to see 3 species of vegetation lumped together. Well, I shouldn't say species. You've got grapes, you've got Virginia creeper, and you got porcelain berry. The moths that feed on one feed on all of the others. Now, we're not going to be discussing porcelain berry for obvious reasons because it's an invasive and it spreads like crazy. Grape, too, is very invasive. There's native species and there's non-native species of grapes. So unless you're planting a vineyard, I'm not going to be discussing grapes much either. But Virginia creeper is very, very popular among many, many species of moths. Now, before I go any further, I should say that you may not want to plant Virginia creeper because some people are allergic to it. So when you're like ripping it out or something, it's not maybe quite as bad as poison ivy, but some people develop rashes. But if you have a part of your yard that's wild or you want to let grow wild and Virginia creeper introduces itself, you may want to consider leaving it because you get things like the Pandora sphinx moth. Aren't too many moths with that olive green color, but that's one of them. And one night I was out on the deck looking at the catch of the day at the lights, and I played my flashlight around to the Virginia creeper that was growing along the side of the deck and up the house. And I saw this. That's a late instar, perhaps last instar of the Pandora sphinx moth. It comes in 2 colors. This color, and then a color that looks like the color of the adult, kind of an olive green color. Cool moth. Outstanding. How about these 2? 8-spotted forester, I'm sure you've seen. It's often a day flyer, but that's also a grape and Virginia creeper feeder, as is the beautiful wood nymph, which is not to be confused with the butterfly wood nymph. This is a moth wood nymph, of which there are 2 species, the pearly wood nymph and the beautiful wood nymph, and both of them feed on things in the grape family. And you often see these during the day as well, perched on vegetation. They got that bird dropping that thing going about them. Oh boy, poison ivy. I'm not suggesting people plant poison ivy. If anybody gets it, poison ivy, don't sue me that I told you to grow poison ivy. But if you have a wild part of your property, there are things that host on poison ivy. After all, it is native. So things like the beautiful Utilia. Who knew? So, and also the showy emerald. Now these feed not only on poison ivy, but they feed on poison sumac. I presume nobody's going to want to plant poison sumac either. But I had a friend once, Sharon and I had a friend who worked at Fish and Game, Brian Zarati, who was a bog turtle expert. And we were out together on a property up in Sparta looking for bog turtles. And he was pointing out how they had to go into this marsh and remove all of the poison sumacs. And I said, well, what can I say? You're not going to get any more beautiful Utilias. Of course, he didn't know what the hell I was talking about. Indian hemp, well, we all know this as a great nectar plant for butterflies. Now, here are about 25 American ladies in one small group of Apocynom. And I don't know whether Tom remembers this or not, but Tom was out on Old Mine Road, not too far from Route 206, way up there by. Who did?
Steve.
Oh, Steve did. Sorry, Steve.
I was wondering where the heck that was. He was following you in the car. You stopped.
Ah, well, whoever. Steve gets credit. There's massive numbers of American ladies, and this happens from time to time. We've had mass numbers of meadow fritillaries. We've had mass numbers of hackberry and tawny emperors occasionally, and other things. And hair streak. Sharon and I had this enormous outbreak of, believe it or not, hickory hair streak and banded hair streak some years ago at Whittingham in Sussex County. So here we are with Apocynom, very common plant. And here are some of the moths that use that as a host. The delicate cycnia we've seen on many field trips. Okay, you see that during the day. And but we don't often see purple-lined sallow. That's a terrific moth. And of course, snowberry clearwing is something else that hosts on Apocynom. And here's the caterpillar. Some of you may remember this, that we saw this on a field trip to Dennis Breedy's place, Mountain Meadow, some years ago up in Blairstown. And we have another field trip there coming up this year on August 30th, not to be missed. And of course, there's the dogbane, however you pronounce that last name. Mints, Lamiaceae. Well, we all know many species of mints, particularly wild bergamot, which is just coming into bloom now in North Jersey. Just a few of them have started. And there's a lot of things that host on mints, particularly in the moth world. Hermit sphinx. Now, this is a caterpillar. I tried to select photos that we've seen on field trips. So we did see a caterpillar hermit sphinx once on a field trip to Kittatinny Valley State Park. And there's the adult. We had a caterpillar that Sharon found on our mountain mint some years ago, but I've never seen an adult in the yard, despite the fact that we've got lots of mints. And a very pretty one, a small but pretty, the orange-spotted pyrosta. There's many species of pyrosta, and several of them actually host on mint. Goldenrods and asters, the Asteraceae family. Of all the herbaceous plants, according to Doug Tallamy, goldenrods and asters host, or goldenrods in particular, host the most moth or leps in general. So let's take a look at a few of these. The green leuconicta, notice how I said that with conviction. Very abundant this year. This is the best year I can remember for green lunonictas. They're all over the place. The goldenrod flower moth hosts on goldenrod. Now the goldenrod stowaway moth, great name by the way, doesn't host on goldenrods, but it spends the day in the inflorescence of goldenrods where it's ideally camouflaged.
How big is the stowaway?
How big is the stowaway moth? It's probably about maybe 3/4 of an inch. Yeah, it's not one of those micro moths. So lots of different asters, and of course we know pearl crescent, the lovely little pearl crescent hosts on asters, but there's also a lot of moths that do it. There's a particular favorite of mine, the brown-hooded owlet, and it's got that terrific looking caterpillar. Really outstanding. Ferns, I like ferns because the deer don't like them. The deer don't like them, so I like them. So there's lots of ferns in New Jersey. We're very rich in ferns. You get the kind that's spread underground rhizome, like hay-scented fern. And you have the clumped or the bouquet-like stands of interrupted fern and cinnamon fern and things like that. Unfortunately, the state of our knowledge isn't such that we know specific species of moths feed on what specific species of fern. But it's true generally across the plant groups. So you'll see this such and such feeds on oaks. Well, there's lots of oaks. Do they feed on all of the oaks? Do they feed on just the red oak group or the white oak group? We don't know. But we do know that there's two particularly cool looking moths, of which I've had both, the silver spotted fern moth and the more common pink shaded fern moth. And when they are fresh, they are really something to behold. The clovers, we know them for as a host plant for various different butterflies, including tail blue and things like, the Lespedezas are host to hoary edges. And if your lawn is like my lawn, which is to say not a lawn at all, but just a patch of weeds, there's a lot of white clover, and there's some other things in there that are hosts to things like the virgin tiger moth. This is a big tiger moth. That wing spread is maybe about nearly 2 inches. And then the chickweed geometer, which people often see as they walk across weedy areas. It's a very common thing, particularly at Sandy Hook. You go to Sandy Hook, you'll see lots of chickweed geometers. We can't forget grasses and the Poaceae, lots of grasses. I'm just showing you two here. Bottle brush grass, which is the host plant for things like northern pearly-eye. It's a beautiful grass, by the way. It's a nice thing to plant. And then switchgrass, that's down here in the bottom of the photo, just below those mountain mints. And that's very popular, the genus Panicum. And then you get a whole bunch of things there. So there's a lot of grass skippers. Grass skippers like grasses and sedges, some of them. So things like mulberry wing. But as I said, there's a lot more moths. And this is just 3 examples of the moths that show up at my lights based upon the grasses that are in the yard and in the general neighborhood. We can't forget pines and conifers in general. So this is just a common, at least North Jersey species, white pine. And the Joko sallow, the other name for this is the Joker. So it's part of my Batman series of moths. And then you got the salt and pepper looper, which is a northern species which dips down into northern New Jersey. And the brown spotted, again, Zally, not Zale. We're reaching the end here now. We've got very common eastern red cedar. That's very common, and we know it as the primary host for juniper hairstreak. But there's other things, juniper twig geometer, curved line angle, lots of moths host on eastern red cedar, just like different ones host on like Atlantic white cedar. Even dead stuff hosts moths. So there's the dead wood borer. So you got part of your wood, part of your forest, or part of your property. Just let the fallen logs lay, let the standing logs stand, and you'll attract things like dead wood borer moths, in addition to a whole bunches of other things. And fungi, same thing. Keep the fungi and you'll get the fungus moths. This is a fairly uncommon one in my experience. And even lichens. It's hard to believe that caterpillars can feed on lichens and get any kind of nourishment from it, but they do. So the black and yellow lichen moth is a day flyer. Frequently see that on mints just about this time of year. And then there's 2 other ones, the painted lichen moth and the less common scarlet winged lichen moth. If you have a water feature, great. There's aquatic moths, believe it or not. Shouldn't come as a surprise. And here are 4 examples of things that we've had in the yard routinely that are termed aquatic species. And you've often heard the phrase, leave the leaves. Well, what does that mean? Well, lots of things use dead leaves. Red-banded hairstreak, for example. The larvae apparently feed on the detritus of leaves. I've never seen it myself, but that's what you read. And then there's a whole bunch of moths called litter moths, where the caterpillars just root around in the leaf litter. And they're part of the whole army of decomposers that are so important. So here's an example. Here's the upper part, the leaves that we've left. Here's a clear dagger moth caterpillar, and there's the adult. And then needles too, pine needles, same thing. And there's a luna moth caterpillar, and of course there's the adult. And if you don't need any other reason for keeping the leaves, just think luna moth, because the cocoons are left in the leaf litter. The other spice bush, the other giant spice moths are up in shrubs. They're cocoons. So that is my program, ladies and gentlemen. This, by the way, is a close-up of a very obliging luna moth, head-on. I like taking these head-on shots. By the way, the camera that I use is simply just a cheap Canon, essentially point-and-shoot camera, with a built-in flash. That's all. I'm not, writing any magazine articles for natural history or anything, so I don't need top-notch camera equipment. But I'm happy to entertain any questions. I just would also add that if any of you are thinking of getting more heavily into moths and want to attract them with lights, please be aware that there is a downside to that. You're affecting not just the moths. They got other things to do than just hang around. But where was I going with this? Oh, yes. I usually keep my lights on for just 2 or 3 hours, and not every evening, obviously. The best evenings are warm and still sort of nights, dark nights, so you don't want a big moon. And so the nights that are too cold, too windy, that are for some sort of precipitation, I don't even bother. But on a good night, I keep my lights on. At this time of year, when the days are long, I start attracting moths around maybe 9:30, quarter to 10, and by 11:30, I'm done. I mean, I'm not done. I could go on, but I turn off everything by that time. I know people who keep the lights on all night long, and they go out the following morning to see what they've got, and they take them inside and cool them down so they can photograph them and all that sort of nonsense. I don't go in for that. But yeah, I think you'll find it a rewarding hobby, and there are moth nights that take place periodically. I'm no longer invited to moth nights. I don't know why. Yeah, so yeah, get out there and plant some stuff, not just for butterflies, but for moths too. Yes, Gary.
In your first slide, you showed the lamp you're using. That looks different than the traditional mercury.
Well, yeah, okay, there's a story about that. I used to have a mercury vapor lamp there for many years. And mercury vapor lamp emits light in different spectrum, and it's a very powerful light, so it penetrates a little further. Now I just have a black light there now instead. And the reason for that is that somewhere along the line, the makers of mercury vapor lamps changed, and so that they no longer operate in household fixtures. Yeah, they won't work. And so once your mercury vapor lamp goes, and the only ones available now are these new ones, I had to go to a different setup. So unless I mean, I can change the fixture and put in something that would accommodate a mercury vapor lamp. But right now I'm sort of satisfied with the black light. And the places where you can get these things are not, I mean, I used to go to BioQuip and get stuff, and it was real easy, but I think they're out of business now, aren't they, Sharon? Yeah. Any other questions? Really? Yes.
The wild hydrangea, what's the species name on that?
It's hydrangea. This is embarrassing. It's not
Is it the smooth?
is it what?
Smooth? Or wild hydrangea, I can't think of the name.
We'll look it up. But I mean, a lot of the hydrangeas you see in nurseries are those ornamental hydrangeas. They're no good for anything. But the wild hydrangea, which you should be able to get at a good native plant nursery, you know, you may have to go to Pennsylvania, like Geno's or someplace like that to get them. But yeah, it's a terrific plant. We've had to protect ours from deer. But right now, the one that we have now has more than 100 clusters of flowers on it, and it's just coming out now. Terrific, terrific plant. It's not great for butterflies necessarily, but insects in general. What is the name? Oh, it is arborescence. Son of a gun. Learn something new all the time. The summer azure you see there quite a bit. Yep. It's a hobby not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of work. And but then again, there's much better resources now. So it makes it a lot easier. All you got to do is shoot our naturalist, although they've made some remarkable mistakes. I photographed something. See, my problem is that I don't use iNaturalist necessarily to identify stuff. I know what it is, but Tom and I have the same problem, recalling the name. What is the name? And so when I come back in the morning from my nighttime forays looking for moths, and the following morning, if I have time and I'm uploading them, and I'm saying, oh, geez, I've seen this thing a million times. What is the name? So iNaturalist will tell me what it is. So I take a picture of it with iNaturalist. But sometimes it gets bizarre. I mean, one time it told me something was a zebra. I mean, there's crazy stuff. Most of the time, though, it gets it right, or at least it gets it down to the genus, you know. So, and by that time, I probably thought of the name anyway. When you're not thinking of something, that's when you think of it. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
So late, but a lot of your presentation, but I have a question that's not related to what you're talking about here tonight. I planted swamp milkweed about 10 years ago in my yard, and it attracts monarchs. The only thing is they don't seem to clone. Do you have to replace those plants after a certain amount of time? Or can it just keep flowering again every year?
Well, it's been my experience with perennials that it's almost a misnomer. I mean, they will disappear over time. Last year we had 200 common milkweeds in our front lawn, which was great for me because I didn't have to mow. But this year there's like 20 or 30, and most of those died. So yeah, but and anyone else, any gardener want to chime in? It's yeah, what we call weak perennials. I mean, people get really upset about Canada thistle. Oh, it's Canada thistle's growing in this field. I said, don't worry about it. They'll be gone in a few years. Yes.
Every year.
They don't cocoon. Like, you know, he's saying that.
Well-
they incubate the chrysalis, usually on another plant. Oh, yeah, they usually leave them.
Yeah, they go on safari, what we call safari.
I see the males and I see the females around. Sometimes they get acquainted, sometimes they don't. But I've seen them lay eggs, but I don't always know that they're getting fertilized.
If the eggs are laid, they're fertilized.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Prey on the tiny caterpillars. There's, you know, we want, you know, get to see, a sizable one. That's why.
A lot of spiders. Spiders are big predators of
I've seen it on my deck.
butterfly eggs. Well, you know, the other thing is there's fewer and fewer butterflies. So you're just not going to see as many monarchs as you used to. Any other questions? I think we can have the lights, Edmund.
If any of the people watching remotely have questions.
Oh, that's Edmund's job.
It's my job today. We've got a bunch of thank yous from the group.
Cool.
Someone mentioned Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve is a good option for straight species native. I think that was in reference to the hydrangea. Another participant asked if the Virginia creeper is native, to which yes, it is indeed native. I think all the other questions
Didn't I say it was
were
native?
covered. Yes, I
Yeah.
believe you did say it was native. I do have a question myself if no one else has one.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of Allegheny blackberry on my property, and I am debating if its presence in this specific wildflower field is worth my occasional getting pricked. Does it have any moth value?
Yes, absolutely. I can think of one terrific one, which I did not show because it's just too many. But it's called there's actually two species, like sibling species. It's called the glorious habrosyne, Habrosyne, and that is a feeder on rubus. The caterpillars feed on rubus. I'm sure there are others, but that's the one that comes to mind right now, and that's worth just by itself. That's worth keeping some rubus around.
That's good to know.
Well, that's true. It's speaking of butterflies, it's a great early nectar source for many species of butterflies, particularly grass skippers. So when it's blooming, I always check out rubus blooms for the unusual grass skippers, although this year is certainly an anomaly in that regard.
That is good to know. I have some dewberry volunteers too. Is that also rubus? Is rubus
Yes,
all berries? Okay.
dewberry. Yeah, there's two species of dewberry, and they're both good. Again, in the normal year where there's butterflies, it attracts primarily grass skippers. Yep, and it's a pain to walk through, though. Don't walk through dewberry without socks and boots on.
Good to know.
Janet.
Well, mothing at night with lights. Do you ever put out a feeding station like the mashed bananas or anything like that?
Yeah, I used to do that, but I never had a whole lot of luck with it. And besides, you know, you run where I live, you run into the odd bear and raccoon who also would like to eat the bananas and the mush that you put out there. But every moth person, and when I first started mothing, I only knew of 3 other people who were into moths. My friend John Urizari from Sterling Forest, Tony McBride, who lives opposite White Lake, and Dale Schweitzer, who's the acknowledged moth expert from South Jersey. Those were the only moth people I knew. And they all put out bait. You know, and my friend Tony puts out pheromones too. Like I say, I'm not going there. Yeah. Anything else? Zoom? Any other Zoom people want to chime in? No?
Well, what would you recommend?
Well, there's 2 field guides done by Seabrook Lecky and her friend, I forget his name now. But that's a field guide to the butterflies of the Northeast, moths, and a companion guide to field guide to moths of the southeast. So here in the mid-Atlantic, you know, both are kind of important to have.
Those are Peterson guys, right? Peterson guys.
They are Peterson guides, yes. Yep. And they're still, I mean, they're recently published. I'm sure they're still in print. Yeah. Very good field guides. I still use them. One of my one of mine is falling apart. I got to put an elastic band around it to keep it together. But I keep these field guides, like I keep other field guides next to my table, next to my chair, because it's amazing how much information you can pick up just leaping. You sort of get it by osmosis. Wagner. Yeah, yep, absolutely. Excellent guide. He has a lot of information about host plants and what caterpillars look like in various instars and all of that sort of stuff. Yep, absolutely. Anybody else? Oh, you're welcome.